Welcome to Lecture 7.1, Conditionals for Introduction to Programming and Mechanical Engineering. By the end of this lecture video, you will have an understanding of what Boolean values are, what conditional statements are, how to write various types of conditional statements, and how to use conditional statements to control the flow within a script. This slide, the table of contents, contains hyperlinks to each of the sections to make the downloaded PDF easy to navigate. A Boolean value can occupy either the state true or the state false. They're used to represent systems that can only ever be in one of two states. For example, a non-dimmable light bulb can only be on or off. In code, you could represent this with a variable as follows. The variable light bulb on stores either the value true or the value false. A conditional statement uses Boolean values to control the actions within code. The simplest version of this follows the flow if blank, then blank. For example, if the light is on, then turn the light off. In code, this can be written very simply as follows. If light bulb on, turn bulb off. Note that the variable light bulb on stores a Boolean value, so this statement is checking whether the value of light bulb on is set to true. In addition to the simple if-then flow, the keyword else can be used to add an action if the condition is not met. For example, if light bulb on is true, then turn bulb off like before. Else, meaning if light bulb on is set to false, then turn bulb on. To extend the logical flow beyond just a single check, else if can be used to add follow-up conditions to the first. This might be useful if, for example, you have a variable that can be checked in categories. Take stress-strain curves. It would be beneficial to consider regions of the curve for the mechanical response of a material. In this graph, we see three distinct regions of the curve. The first is when the strain is between 0 and the elastic limit, referred to as the proportional limit on the graph. Then there's the region between the proportional limit and the yield strength, and then beyond the yield strength point. Those are the three regions. Consider a strain gauge measurement from testing a material. We want some code that can identify which region of the graph that measurement occupies. Note that the first two regions, meaning between 0 and the elastic limit and between the elastic limit and the yield point, both have lower and upper limits. The logical operators double ampersand, which represents the AND operation, and the double pipe, which represents the OR operation, are used to form more complex conditional statements like comparing two bounds, which is useful here. The double ampersand operator results in an output of true when both of its inputs are true. In this example, A equals 1, B equals 2, and the inputs of the AND operation are both false because A is not less than 0 and B is not greater than 10. Therefore, the output C is also false. In the second example, the first argument is now true because A is greater than 0. But the second argument remains false, so the output C is also false. Similarly, in this third argument, the first argument is false, but the second is true, so the output remains false. But when both arguments are set to true because A is greater than 0 and B is less than 10, then the output C is true. In contrast, the double pipe operator results in an output of true when at least one of its inputs is true. In this example, where again A is 1 and B is 2, the inputs of the OR operation are both false because, just like before, A is not less than 0 and B is not greater than 10. Therefore, the output C is also false. But unlike with the AND operator in this second example, the first argument that A is greater than 0 is now true. The second argument remains false, but the output C is now true because the first argument is true. Similarly, when the second argument is true and the first is false, the output is still true. And of course, when both of them are true, the output C is true. Let's apply this back to the stress-strain example. The following code will determine which region of the curve the measurement occupies. First, we check if the measured strain is greater than 0 and less than the elastic limit. If that's the case, then the system is under elastic elongation. Next, we check if the measured strain is greater than the elastic limit and less than the yield limit. If that's the case, then the system is under plastic elongation and we would handle it differently. Finally, we check if the measured strain is greater than yield. If that's the case, then the system has failed. And if all of those logical checks are false, then it's probably an invalid measurement. Now, an alternative to if statements is to use switch statements. These define cases for some test variable. To replicate the light bulb example from earlier, we start with the statement switch light bulb on, which declares that the variable light bulb on is the thing that we are going to test. Then there is a first case where the variable light bulb on is set to true, and in that case, we want to turn the bulb off. The alternative is where light bulb on is set to false, and so in that case, we want to turn the bulb on. Switch statements are useful. They accomplish the same goal, but they're not necessary to use in any way. Now, to summarize, this lecture covered what Boolean values are, which is values that can take either true or false. They're used to reflect a case that can only be in one of two states, like whether a light bulb is on or off. Conditional statements extend the functionality of Boolean values to control the flow of a script. The most simple case of that is if-then. But then there are different types of conditional statements where you can, for example, use the else keyword to add functionality when the condition is not met. And the keywords else if can be used to add more checks within the same statement that follow up from the first one. And then switch statements provide an alternative syntax for checking pretty much the same thing between them. Finally, conditional statements allow you to control the flow within your script by dealing with different cases for certain variables. Like, for example, with the stress strain curve, we can test whether we're undergoing elastic or plastic strain or even failure.